think I would end up doing that sarcastically, and like in my final form, I become a 6-foot Terra Trafser.
I
I think that's the intro to the video. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the inkers are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24 years and I have about 26. So tonight we are kind of doing what we did last time, and we're just kind of taking a look at a really fun dance. We don't really have a specific topic for tonight like we tend to do. We're taking a look at Kyle Red and Jessica McCurdy from Grand Nationals just recently.
Yep. Link is in the chat. Go ahead and give it a watch. When you're done, we'll get to analyzing.
I love the ending. He's just like, bye.
He's a big troll the whole time. We're gonna spend a minute on one of his facial expressions, just to like burn it into our memories. Make sure nobody ever forgets it. Everybody can already tell what kind of a night this is gonna be.
Yeah.
Cassie's tired. Run away. Okay.
Same.
You're stuck with me. Do the screen share. I love how they like don't even connect for a good 8 or so beats after the song comes on. No rush whatsoever.
Yeah. Very opposite of what we usually talk about, which is, connecting and kind of staying there for a while.
Yeah. And then when they do connect, they kind of do that. So they're just like adding an extra relaxed step in the beginning that I am here for.
Yeah, agreed. Especially like with the song, there's not any rush to get going anywhere.
Kyle is such a troll in this dance. He's dancing as much with his eye lines as the rest of them.
Yeah, that's true. I love that first little kind of not body roll necessarily, but little hip flourish that Jess does. I love so the way she does it, like she makes sure to continue all the way through it. And even though he has his arm kind of all the way around her back, she still finishes like all of the around that she's doing with the hip.
I also want to just highlight this closed position shape in general. Like they're not squared to each other.
Yeah.
He's bringing her up against the front right corner of his torso. And what's nice about that is that tends to automatically offset your legs and your knees, and just gives both partners more room to be relaxed and to embellish if they so choose. I love how she just pulls out an extra spin. She's like, nah, no big deal. This wasn't hard work at all. That face. That's the one.
So there's something interesting that happens in a lot of Kyle and Jess's dances together. He does a lot of like arm things with her, like more so than I see him do with other follows.
Yeah, he tends to do this stuff either with Sarah or Jess. With Jess, it's a little bit easier because she's closer to him in height, so he doesn't have to bend over to reach. And the thing that's like really cool about this is it's almost like a Newton's cradle kind of situation. He's bringing her into compression, and he's taking that compressive force and allowing it to rotate him. And simply because he has his weight on his heels, it makes it look like super fancy footwork. But all he's doing is taking that kinetic energy, using it to move himself, and he's on his heels.
Yeah.
Like as a leader, you could get yourself to do that on your own. But if it follows applying weight to the system, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that he puts her in a position where he wants her to stay back pitched or back weighted, even though initially she kind of is in this forward pitch when he stops her. But because of the way that he has his hands, right, he kind of has one hand in front of her shoulder and then kind of transitions it from like almost a grab to like a palm to press it back or keep it back as they then move forward. All right, so they transition hands and then he grabs the arm. And then after he does his little swivel thing here, he changes it to this palm to kind of even further move her pitch backwards.
Yeah, it's really subtle, but it's allowing first that kinetic change of energy, and then afterwards is allowing him to lead her to travel with him, but staying in a more tethered connection instead of compressed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting connection because you can see she has her hand kind of like up wrapped over his hand. And so he's pulling her on like with the hands, but then kind of pressing back with the arm. So it's a very interesting, he's simultaneously moving her forward and moving her backwards.
Yeah. Basically ensuring it's the spacing that he wants.
Yep.
And then because it's Jess, she has all you have to do is lead Jess to walk and you'll get something magical.
I love how smoothly they transition from her having her back to him. And she is paying attention to what he's doing, even though he's behind her. But he doesn't like yank her.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times what you'll get from like leads in a position like this where the follows have the back to them, you kind of get like a yanking to be like, come back this way. And that is not particularly helpful in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier to do it smoothly.
Especially since like her right arm is technically behind her upper body. So like she's connected, but her shoulder is compromised. And if you were to apply a lot of force right there, it could really hurt, particularly her rotator cuff.
So he really doesn't do all that much to lead her. A lot of times what you'll see is a physical like movement of the arm, like coming into the lead when they're trying to like bring their follow back with them.
Right.
But he's using his kind of pitching sideways and he's just kind of taking himself on a walk.
Yep.
And
then small steps.
Yeah, and she's moving backwards with him, and that kind of prompts her to put the weight on the foot where she can turn back around. And it's all very gentle. There's not a aggressiveness to it like there can be sometimes.
You have another face. We'll get there. I love how she took over this passing tuck.
Yeah.
So.
It's a beautiful face.
So beautiful.
Yeah, so she basically just releases the hand that's up, her right hand, while she is creating connection to kind of the rib area with her left arm. It's not so much just her hand, it's kind of like hand and wrist that she's going for, because that's a little bit more stable than just a hand. And that, based on the turn that she's doing, is not so much turning her necessarily, like she's not really pushing off of him.
Yeah, because she's doing a spiral.
Right.
or a hook
Right.
into a spiral.
The hand on his side is more so to keep the connection, but not in a way that allows him control. And so she spirals, right? So she hooks her left foot behind. And that's what's uh, rotating her, not that she's like pushing off of him.
And I love that how he's reaching to like be ready to like connect with her
That's
with
what I
his
was
left
gonna say.
hand.
Yeah.
And then what's really unique about this is her rotation is moving towards his shoulder as opposed to away. So it doesn't naturally lead to a kind of normal tethered connection point because you kind of have to stop and redirect the energy to get it to go like into the hand. So that's why we get this moment where she's turning, don't use the word turning in a turning discussion, Cassie. She's changing her rotational energy into linear. So she stops turning to the left and starts progressing to the right and down to like ground into that hand. So he then has something to lead.
Yeah.
All together. I love how he just like nonchalantly turns it into a telemark afterwards.
Yeah. And she does a great job of not like staying in this position that she's getting in. She kind of is there in order to reconnect with him and then gets up out of the way. And she collects her feet underneath her, which is another important thing.
So something we've been talking about with one of our students recently is the concept of, as a leader, not reaching out away from you.
Yeah.
Right. And I just wanted to highlight that through this section in particular, because Kyle is leading Jess within his space.
Yeah.
And not overreaching. And the game isn't about going around each other. The game is sharing a center and pivoting around it a lot of the time, or taking turns. So he's out of the slot here. He's turning her like right in front of him. They're not offset. And then as he's switching to a more standard close position with his right hand, he's doing that face loop really close to his own body, so she can't get too far away. Because it's very counterintuitive to, if you're not familiar with that kind of shared axis or taking turns style of rotation and pivoting, where it's almost like you're occupying the same space together as a partnership. It's really natural to like try to reach and then to go around each other, but that is so much more work.
I love the grounding that happens. So Jess is like taking the energy to the outside of her body, and then she is sending it a little bit down. And she does that on kind of both of these little moments where they're grounding here, where she is really sitting back into the connection as she's really grounding. But she's not disconnecting her arm from her body. She is keeping that connected, and she's just kind of increasing her level of being grounded by really bending into the knees. But that's just increasing the weight, kind of going down. It's not changing entirely the way that she's connecting in terms of the kind of circular momentum that you need.
And what Kyle is doing on the other side of this is he's scrolling away with a body lead. Saying it that way makes it sound like super simple. But a lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah.
So as a leader, knowing when to take the hand with you versus when to kind of leave it in place. So it's more of a center counterpoint that's not traveling anymore. That's one of the distinctions that is really helpful to understand to do your basics correctly. But then it's one of those rules that you can play with to be super creative the more advanced you get in your leading. And so I want to highlight the rate of travel down the slot. We're comparing Kyle's body with Kyle's hand. And so as he's rotating past her, it's about they're moving at the same rate. But then as soon as we get to the quote unquote anchor transitioning between these two patterns, the hand stops moving quite as fast as Kyle. So he's able to get to more extension, and it's encouraging her to like anchor into that connection. That doesn't mean there isn't tension, right? Because of everything that Alicia just said that Jess is doing. So there's still a lot of tension in the handhold right here. They're just using it to have a moment of breath and a moment of pause, particularly on Jess's end. And then as soon as it comes to count one, the hand actually starts accelerating faster than his body. So it's about the same. It's about the same. It's about the same. It's an anchor. So the hand stops traveling as much. And then as soon as he starts really leading with that left foot, it travels about the same as his body. And then on the follow through, because of what he's leading next, it actually goes a little bit faster for an itty bitty acceleration prepping into this turn.
Yeah. Yes, it is, Andrew.
Yes. Barrel rolls, dangerous, but potentially pretty. I feel like if we did like a global survey of West Coast swing, be like, how many of y'all have been injured to any degree, minor or major, in a barrel roll? I think that number would be scary. Be like a pie chart that was a circle. Barrel rolls. Attempt at your own risk.
Yeah, it's a really hard one to get the hang of.
And then this is another example of he's not overextending himself. And it is super helpful when two partners are much closer in height to do barrel rolls. It makes it so much easier. But he is making sure she is very close to him. And is starting her rotation before she's caught up with him. So she's starting it here when she's still screen right. So they can kind of roll off of each other. Like, why is that the image that's coming to my mind? I'm thinking of like the vertical car wash rollers that you kind of go through. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but for barrel rolls, you should be having body contact. Like a lot of times I see them being done where there's zero touching of upper body.
Like they're doing London Bridge, but with their backs to each other.
Yeah. I don't know where to put it. But yeah, you really, especially for follows, like you need to understand that in this particular pattern, like you should be having upper body, like shoulder contact and like across the back. And I think, in my opinion, I think that requires understanding from both parties. It's not something that, like other patterns, is just automatically going to be led through that way. Because you have to be okay with the like running into each other.
Yeah, it's like a gentle roll off of I would say it's less invasive than like having your right thighs together to pivot.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a weird sentence if you don't know what you mean.
Hugh Ross Geller screaming, pivot.
Yes, but like we were saying on these, like, as a follow you have to be comfortable with like physically running into your lead, not super aggressively. It's just going to be based on how much they accelerate you into them, but there is that initial physical like typically you're going to want to avoid running into the person that you're dancing with, right? So it's just like a weird mental thing where you just have to know that you actually have to physically run into them.
Yeah, because if you look at her left arm, she actually braces against his abdomen.
Yep.
With her left arm.
Yeah, she starts it a little early.
Yeah, so when she gets to a point where she can't physically see him anymore, she already has some tactile information about where he is, and then she just rolls across him.
Yeah, and she's initiating contact more with like the lower arm initially. And a lot of times, usually it's more kind of upper arm shoulder that you're starting the connection with, but she's starting a little earlier, or she's adding a little onto it by adding in the lower part of the arm too.
Yep. And that's in part because he's waiting to really get into his rotation until after hers is started.
Yeah.
That's what makes it look so easy, is because she's doing more turning before he is.
Yeah.
And he just follows through with it.
This right here is what I wanted to take a look at because it's a super interesting connection. Right. So he basically stops her and then he moves towards her to like wrap around her elbow. So that when she like backs away, they catch each other just behind or just above the elbow area.
It looks so secure. I love it.
Yeah. And I like the way that he went about it too, because he's not just trying to like catch her out of nowhere. Like he threaded his arm through, right? So she knows that his hand is waiting there. So when she's backing away, she's fully aware that his hand is going to be right there to catch her as he releases her hand.
Yeah.
And so then she knows that, okay, well, since his hand is there, I'm going to run into it with my kind of, lower arm or like elbow area. I'm going to also catch on his arm.
Yep. And then he essentially leads a rock and go from that right hand to elbow ×2 situation.
Yeah.
And then he accelerates himself out of that to get into a right to right hand hold, and she just hangs back deliciously. And some may be asking, like, how does she know to hang back? So it's in part because he's simply like letting go of the elbow at that point, so he can switch to the handhold. But what's happening when that happens is he's not able to take her and follow through. So she doesn't get any more initiation to go forward. That follow through is really important. And like we did when I highlighted earlier, when we were comparing the rate of speed of his hand versus his body, after he led the one, the hand actually accelerated a little bit. That's the follow through. And it doesn't necessarily need to accelerate, but it needs to keep on going. If you just give a follow, if you move the handhold through space down the slot, if you only do that on count 1, a good follow won't continue coming towards you.
Right.
Unless it's a release of a center counterpoint and you're both moving towards each other. That's a different scenario. But
that is like the follow has to already have a change of pitch.
Yeah.
To be able to do that, right? Because as a follow, you should be pitched backwards initially, and then you're slowly brought up through it into a more forward pitch. But if you're still in a backwards pitch, you should automatically stay backwards.
Yep. His rotation right there is just so good. So he did basically a face loop. He's continuing to rotate to his left. And the way he is just letting her arm be in a completely relaxed range of motion for her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not knocking her over in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Like this is one of those connections where it's just the relaxed weight of their arms that's creating connection. And there shouldn't necessarily be tension or compression. It's just kind of like the magnet nose squish kind of pressure in your relaxed arms. If he wanted to like lead her to rotate afterwards, that'd be a different matter. He'd be applying different connection to the handhold. But because he's just turning himself, he's letting her stay relaxed. I think that's one of the things that I think is actually more helpful for like refrigerator door exercise. It's like, can you turn and rotate without affecting the refrigerator door? This is where that applies really well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is where the first song cuts out and the second song comes in. Mm-hmm. And they go back to just, it's almost like they hadn't had a song right before then. And they just relax a while, and then Kyle gets really aggressive with his
I also want to mention that Jess is doing like a very similar version of the anchor she was doing in the first song, which was slower. But she is really making it so that she can move through things faster, right? So she's not like sitting and like really leaning back. She's keeping herself a little bit more upright as she's kind of sitting into this little anchor. But like the technique in and of itself is more or less the same thing she was doing, just a little bit more shallow version of it.
Yeah. And I think this is language that only came to me actually while we were talking before we started tonight. Because you've been helping me apply pitch to faster songs and when you're only on the ball of the foot. So pitch, forward or backward, is relative to how much surface of your foot is on the floor. So like if you have your entire foot on the floor, and we'll just pretend everyone's in heels because then it's really obvious to know which part of the foot is what. You need to be either here or back, really, to be back pitched, right? But if it's just the ball of your foot on, oh no, I don't know how to do this, and then the heels up here, that looks horrifying. But if this is the only area that is on the floor, as long as you're back there, you're back pitched. Anyways,
I'm trying to figure out what that foot is supposed to be doing.
Well, see, this is supposed to be an arch, and then the heel is now pointed that way because it's on the ball of the foot. I just ignore everything I just said. Or Drew.
Said a T-Rex. It's really interesting how he's catching her arm and bringing her so that she's not coming all the way forward. She's just kind of checking forward and then going back, right? So he's catching kind of like the back over the shoulder initially so she can sit into that and bring her forward. And then he's doing kind of the same thing earlier where he's coming from behind for the arm. Right. So he has his right arm over her shoulder, and then he reaches with his left to like stop her here. And he's more resisting what she's doing, and she's also giving him some like more frame.
There's another element to this that I think might be contributing because it also has a very up and down pulse to it. through these redirects. And he does a pretty aggressive down right here, and an up, and then a down. And I bet she's feeling that and is running with it. And that also helps indicate we're not going to progress with these weight transfers. We're going to ground and sink into them instead. And then the way it looks like with his left hand, his hand's just basically around her tiny bicep. If you're with a follow and your hands aren't big enough for that, you can turn your thumb down and wrap your fingers around the front of the bicep to create a similar, or go in between the arm and the upper body and wrap your fingers around that way, so your thumb's up.
Yeah, you would just be resisting it from a slightly different angle.
And then I want to highlight like how quickly he is applying brakes to the situation. So we have the up, and he's already caught onto the back of her shoulder. He's already applying brakes. Her right foot isn't even on the ground yet. And then similarly going forward, by here, he is already applying brakes. Her right foot has not even touched the ground yet. And again, here, he's already applying brakes with his right hand. And it's that you need time to apply the brakes as a leader. That is so important. So many leaders tend to associate the catching with the end count. But that's way too late. And the follow is either going to be really confused, or they're going to end up leading themselves at that point.
There should always be a catch and then a sinking into. And so the connection gradually gets stronger. And that's what's creating that break. Like, it's not just like as a follow running into a wall. And that's what happens when you have leads that will like apply brakes on the count that you are wanting to redirect on. Is it's like running into a wall. And then you just kind of rebound out of that, which doesn't typically create the effect that is wanted.
I'm trying to think of like all the ways, because like it takes a lot of skill to be able to have control over that as a follow when a leader isn't catching you in time. I'm just thinking of all the different ways I would fail at that before I had the skill to be able to handle that. Like, one would be like I would fall over because they wouldn't catch me. I would keep going, and the catch would not be there. It was a trust fall with misplaced trust. And then there's the like, I trust no one, therefore I'm not even going to commit weight to that side ever. That's the other problem I had. And then I was like, well, if I keep switching weight from side to side, they'll eventually figure out they can move me, which is still a valid tool that I use on occasion. And now, what you taught me is I just sink into it. I hang out there. I wait. Great.
As a follow, it's really nice to be able to have control over what you're doing. There are some techniques that are used that don't allow that. And so when you're able to, you can always very quickly get yourself under control for the most part. And that makes like correcting things a lot easier, because then you're choosing to go into something a certain way instead of just like falling, like you were saying.
That styling into like that she does is like one of her signature things. I love it so much. It's one of those things like, I love it, but I don't have the personality to pull that off. So, I think I would end up doing that sarcastically, and like in my final form, I become a 6-foot Terra Trafser. I think that's the intro to the video.
Sorry. I don't know why that caught me off guard so much. Anyways, It's hard to say something about.
Take away my podcasting license, please.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about the angle that they're at. All right, because they initially are fine, and then they become kind of offset, like in almost like a diagonal, but they're still connected, right? So just changes the direction that she is sinking back into, from like straight back to more of an angled back as he's kind of moving offset to her.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that when he's placing his right foot here, he's setting himself off to the rail. So he's not directly in front of her, which means that when moving towards the audience, he's a little bit closer to the audience than she is, which allows the tethered lead to happen. So we have bird's eye view, audience here, Jess is here, Kyle's here, connection. So if he moves this way, it's going to tether her into that direction. A lot of leaders do this thing where they have the follow over here, and then they're over here, and then they try to move this way, but then the follow's like, okay, they don't have to move.
Yeah.
In order for that, they're just waiting. What you doing?
Yep.
It's much harder to do that, and you need to be physically closer to each other and have a really strong lateral connection, almost like tricycle frames, in order to like compress a follow to move to the side from that direction. This one, what they're doing right now, a lot easier.
Yeah.
Ooh, this is a really good, like even the champs get into handholds where they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
And instead of trying to apply more force to the system, because like that might even hurt him at this point, he's like, I'm just gonna be gentle with this and let it resolve naturally.
Yep. Yeah, because it's not as awkward for her as it is for him, but it is still awkward for her because it's like locking her arm out.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that, like, oh, this is awkward. Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to be the one that's more awkward. So she feels safe. And that is how leaders should lead.
Yeah. Yep. And one thing I want to point out, so because they get into this super strange handhold situation, Jess like really stays backward. Like she is very pitched backwards because she's like, you need to lead me into what we're doing from here. Because there's not a ton of ways that they could resolve it, but like if the follow in this situation tries to resolve it one way and the lead tries to resolve it another, it's probably going to get a little bit dangerous because of all the twisting of the hands and such. So rather than her trying to solve it, which sometimes can be helpful when a follow is like, oh, I'm in this weird position, I can see how I can get out of this, let me get out of this. Like sometimes that's helpful. But like in this particular situation, because they're both just in such a strange arm position, it's much better for her to just be like, I'm gonna pitch back and wait, and you can move me into whatever you want to do to get out of this.
Yep. Remember, kids, only make this kind of joke if you know each other really, really, really well.
Yeah. Love the face that he makes when he's coming out of it. He's just like, ugh.
They're both like, oh God, what did we just do?
Yeah.
I just had a flashback to Tot and Semyon at Budapest, and she basically gave him like a lap dance and then immediately apologized.
I'd block that out of my mind. But it does exist online.
It does. This is another really good example of him leading her inside of his space, inside of his frame. So he turns her into I like to call it like the shoulder pocket. So she's rotating into a space inside his right shoulder. And then he's basically tossing her into his right hand. And because he's catching her right here, where his left elbow is essentially up against his own waist, he has the time and the space in his frame to stop her with inside the boundary of his own frame. Mm-hmm. And then he does a similar thing. He rotates her in front of his right shoulder to catch her into closed position and then do the telemark. So masterful sequence of keeping a follow inside your own frame as a leader. I love he's like, you can tell he made the decision to do like the weight supported move, like right here. I think of the Kyle faces we have seen thus far, I think this is my favorite one right here.
Good one. I want to talk about this really fast because when you watch it at speed with the music, he actually puts her into it so she comes out a little bit early before the spot you would really probably want to hit. Mm-hmm. But she goes with it and she kind of does like a little hit. That initial up that she does is, I think, when it probably should have been, but she just kind of rebounds out and does a second hit. Mm-hmm. So it's like da instead of da.
Yep.
I love that she goes into a 1 foot, but like doesn't overly commit to it.
Yeah.
Like she keeps her toe kind of dragging on the ground.
And that I find that so much more interesting than just like spin.
Right. And the other thing with that is like it's a really good way if you are getting put into a 1 foot and you don't feel like overly stable, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of just feeling not stable and then committing to 1 foot and just trying to find your balance, rather than that, you create kind of your own balance point in your own body by having your 1 foot that you're mostly on, but then your second foot is still on the floor. It's just not really weighted much. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot easier because you can always really quickly place the foot down and put weight on it. Whereas if you commit to the 1 foot and you're like, well, I don't feel super comfortable with how I'm balanced in this, and you bring the foot up anyways, that's a lot longer distance to get out of it. So it's just a much smoother experience if you aren't feeling perfectly balanced.
Then I want to highlight how Kyle is transitioning into this kind of really chill ride that's not a ride afterwards. Because so he has this problem. Her left shoulder is rotating away from him and he needs to somehow stay behind it. Mm-hmm. But if he were to stay in this same orientation, he would have to travel all the way around her. So we're talking about the evil of going around someone again. So instead of him trying to like walk forward as fast as he freaking can, which is I think what we see a lot of people do, he ends up rotating on his right foot to take a back step.
Yeah.
And then continues pivoting and does a bit of a ronde there. And so he's able to stay behind her by doing his own rotation.
Yeah.
Oh no, we have another face. Maybe that's what the thumbnail will be. The 5 faces of Kyle Red. I apologize again for my my feet drawing. That was disgraceful.
That was random. You apologized again for your feet drawing?
No, my feet drawing. You've already blocked it from your mind. So you're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that horrible, horrible thing of nightmares that I drew. That's what I'm talking about. Hopefully at least got my point across.
Yeah, it did.
Anyways, thank you all so much for joining us.
Yes.
We will probably be back on, I think I said it for July 13th. So for those of us going to Wild Wild Westy or celebrating partners' birthdays the weekend before, we'll be free to do so. I'm just going to shut up now. You say goodbye.
Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time.
It isn't even that like my brain is Swiss cheese today. It's like my brain is attached to a persnickety fly. And it's just buzzing around. Every once in a while, the fly and my skull occupy the same point in space. That's very rare.
It's a very specific description.
I am so sorry, everyone. I feel for her right here. The hair is just like, you're not allowed to see.
Been there, done that. It's a fun time.
Same.